So welcome to Level Up, everybody. This is our weekly Q&A show where your questions drive our conversation. So if you're watching on LinkedIn or indeed on YouTube, please do follow the links in the chat to register, and we'll send you over to Slido, which is really where you get to join the conversation and drive the show by voting on the questions that you personally would most like the panel to answer. That really helps us prioritize our time. And, you know, without your questions, well, we just have to talk amongst ourselves because we won't have anything to talk about. So please do head over there. It'll be great to see you. And it takes a little while to get to learn it, but once you're in there, it's great value. So look, the first half of the show is general Q&A. This week's theme is project and change management. So you can ask pretty much anything really relating to that. In the second half, well, we choose a topic where we want to spend a little more time, and more on that later. So let me introduce our panel for today. I'd like to begin, if I may, here in the UK with Ian Clarkson, who's joining us from Harrogate up in Yorkshire. Welcome, Ian.
Thanks, Nick. Hello, everyone. Welcome from the north. My name's Ian Clarkson. I'm the practice director for project management at QA training. We're a training organisation with the APMG International.
Okay, excellent. Thank you very much, Ian. We're going, in stark contrast, we're going to move from the north of England all the way down to actually the southern hemisphere and introduce you to Guy Eastoe, who joins us from Port Elizabeth in South Africa. Hello, Guy.
Hello, Nick. Hi, everybody. Thank you for that, Nick. And yes, great to be with you all. And I'm a trainer consultant in project Agile and change management. Just to remind you that we're in the southern hemisphere and it's really pretty cold down here. We do get cold weather.
Okay, well, yeah, right. And I'm kind of thinking, Guy, that your winter is probably like our summer at the moment. So we can compare temperatures and precipitation and all of that kind of thing a little bit later on. So let's leave the garden route of South Africa and whiz over to the arid, dry, which is Phoenix in Arizona. Enjoy Mart Rovers. Welcome, Mart. Good to see you.
Thank you, Nick. Thank you for everybody to join this session. Mart Rovers, work for Interprom. I'm consultant, trainer, coach in several specialty areas, amongst them project and change management. It's a pleasure to be here.
Excellent. Okay, and thank you for getting up super early. We appreciate it. So thank you very much. Not sure I could have managed that quite so early today. So thank you very much indeed. Back across the pond to Amsterdam in the Netherlands, we've got Richard Hoedeman, who's joining us. Hi, Richard. Good to see you.
Hello. Welcome, everybody. I'm Richard. I'm a trainer, coach, and consultant at Control Improve, and I training mostly DevOps and Agile project management. And I do some coaching at the Dutch government and an insurance company.
Okay, thank you very much indeed. I'm sure we'll be tapping into that expertise in a minute. Somebody who spends most of her life actually answering questions all day, every day, is Shanice, who's our customer insight specialist, and she's joining us from High Wycombe. Hi, Shanice.
Hi, thanks so much for having me today. Yep, so used to answering questions. So yeah, one of the people to be here today.
Okay, all right. Well, you're most welcome. Thank you for joining. And last but in no means least at all is Dr. Brin Hodgskiss. Brin, you're joining us from the Greater Cambridge area. Is that in terms of the football team, or is that actually a geographical location?
It's geographical because, as I understand it, the football team's having a bit of a torrid time at the moment. So. Lovely to be here. As you said, I'm Brin Hodgskiss. Most of my work is in the public sector in the UK, but I'm particularly interested in how we can apply psychology to influencing people, and particularly how we can use stories to influence better.
Okay, all right, very interesting. And Brin's going to be our first person to actually lead one of the focus topics a little bit later on in this event. So really looking forward to that. Such a core skill for everybody, and especially when we're all working remotely. So it'd be fantastic to hear your thoughts, your ideas. So welcome to all of our panelists. And, you know, if you're watching this from home or from work, and you feel that, you know what, you could answer the questions yourself and you'd like to join us on the panel, then just let us know. It would be absolutely brilliant to have you, and you can come on board and appear in one of the future events. So it would be really, really good to hear from you. So look, let's jump straight into the questions and hear from our question master for today, who is Charlotte, who is joining us from Reading in the UK. Charlotte, first question, please.
Everybody, question from Bart in the Netherlands. Is it better to do multiple small changes than start a project?
Okay, so is it better to do multiple small changes or start a big project? Ian?
It's a good question. I guess I could argue even a small change is a project in itself. A change is a project, and therefore we should probably treat it as such. I think maybe the question is then a large project. And again, even if it was a large project, I think we're kind of getting to almost like portfolio management there, in the sense of saying, well, are doing lots of small projects better than doing one large project? And for me, the answer is, depends what the nature of the projects are. I think if we don't treat those small changes as projects, we might not end up delivering the benefits. And taking the portfolio view will help kind of decide which ones gets done to kind of deliver on the overall organisational benefits. So, in essence, it depends.
Okay.
It depends on what they are, and depends on kind of how you approach it.
Right. And, you know, I totally agree with that. And, you know, it's the kind of thing that when you start to consider shaping up, you know, a piece of work, is it, you know, discrete? Is it integrated with other things, and so on and so on? What does doing it or not doing it, you know, mean as an outcome for other things which are happening in the organization? Richard?
Yeah, well, maybe it's a sort of a trend as well to shift from projects to products. I hear that a lot. And I think it's good to see that maybe if as a project manager you're shifting to product manager or product owner, it can still be of value to do projects, because if you have multiple teams and you need some coordination, or you need decision making on a higher level, it's good to have some structure and to do some project management on top of it. So I think it's depending, but also it depends on the size and the complexity and that sort of things.
Okay, all right. So I think it's the most common phrase in project management I've heard throughout my entire career. Those two little words, it depends, kind of thing. So yeah, very good. Thank you very much, Charlotte. Let's go to the next question, please.
Question from Bikram Rutray. I have seen in many projects in the past, lines of difference between project and change brings in conflict. How can we bring project and change under a single platform to avoid the friction?
Okay, so where you've got project management discipline and you've got change management discipline, these things can sometimes contradict or clash. So Guy, please go ahead.
Yeah, nice question. First of all, let's understand the difference. Fundamentally, project management is about preparing a solution for the organization, whilst change management is preparing the organization for that solution. And if you understand that difference, then you can put the two together with a focus from the project manager, focusing on building the solution, and a focus on the change manager, preparing the organization. But they can be and should be really part of the same team working together. This would be applicable in a waterfall situation as much as it would be applicable in an agile situation as well, working together to solve a common problem and launch a product and to achieve the value.
It certainly feels, you know, from, you know, kind of my past, that where those two disciplines have been able to be closely integrated, you know, and there's been an open and a constant, you know, kind of dialogue going on, that's very much enriched the overall set of benefits for the organization. Ian, go ahead.
Yeah, I think just building on what Guy was saying, I think, you know, there's a large part of what a PMO does in that, you know, kind of bringing those two together under the structure of a PMO to help kind of bring those that kind of those walls down, if you like, and help resolve that conflict. Kind of all under that kind of one structure, both the kind of the delivery of the solution and kind of the preparing the organisation under that one banner. Now, I know that's an infrastructure that a lot of organisations don't have, but if there's a real kind of conflict there, it's definitely worth thinking about that kind of structure to kind of help resolve that.
It's quite interesting, isn't it, how project management offices in organizations vary tremendously, and many even very mature organizations still are yet to establish a PMO as a formal discipline, and yet it is one of those functions that kind of brings everybody together. Richard?
Yeah, it's mostly then if you look at it from a top-down perspective, but if you look bottom-up, if you're in a team and you're wondering, should I work on this change, or is this project more important, then it comes to prioritization. And it will be helpful to work from a single backlog if you're on a team, so you can integrate both changes and project work for the team to be obvious and to prioritize clearly.
Yeah. I certainly think that there's sometimes this time constraint conflict that comes in that says no, we have to reach this milestone on this date. We have to. And from a change perspective, it's sometimes worthwhile, I think, just considering what is the meaning of that milestone? In reality, is it just simply to be able to tick something off, or is it actually to achieve something? And that can mean a little bit of compromise sometimes, and certainly, in my experience, limited though it is, in talking with sponsors and C-suite people, generally they want that meaningful outcome. They don't just want the kind of, it looks good on the chart, everything is traffic lighted green, So very good, and a really interesting question. So thank you very much, Bikram. Brilliant phrasing in the question. Charlotte, let's go on to the next one, please.
So a question from Sally. Do you feel the pandemic has been more of an advantage or a disadvantage when it comes to managing projects and communicating with teams remotely?
Wow. Okay, so this is kind of pretty much the silver bullet about it all, isn't it? Who would have thought 2 years ago, that we would have been kind of doing this sort of event? Richard, why don't you kick us off, and then we'll go around the panel.
Well, first advantage that comes to mind is it reduced a lot of traveling time, so that's an advantage. But disadvantages are it's more intense to be on screen all day and have Zoom meetings or MS Teams meetings. But what it brought me is that we very quickly jumped into the collaboration tooling and sharing whiteboards together, and that was a leap forwards. I think it was very helpful. So working together and using tooling, it worked.
I absolutely agree. I think the early meetings were quite insular, really, weren't they? We were trying to do it without the collaboration element. Martin, then Shanice.
Shanice, go ahead. Ladies first.
No, Mark, go ahead. It's fine.
Okay. This disadvantage was definitely the human aspect, the human element that was kind of lost early on. Things have adjusted, of course, over time. People gotten used to Zoom meetings or whatever meeting remotely. But this social element is still it's missing, right? This distance when the meetings start and end. There's nothing up front or afterwards. It says, and that's it. No. Hanging around and have a chat about just anything. An advantage has been the productivity. Definitely that getting tasks done on time. You'll see that number definitely increased because of the working remote.
Okay, all right. Thank you very much, and Shanice.
Hi, thank you. I personally feel that it's pushed maybe the more quiet people to feel comfortable talking to other people in the business. So it's pushing those relationships together when necessarily they may not have been pushed before the pandemic.
Right. Okay. Thank you very much. Very insightful. It's a good point, because sometimes it's just the noisy people kind of who get heard all of the time. So, Brin, do you want to wrap this one up for us?
Just building on all the points people have made, is certainly within my work within the NHS, one of the things that the rapid move to remote has created is more opportunities for people to access healthcare. Okay. Ironically, because now you don't have to rely only on phones or arriving there in the flesh. But equally, Mart's point is that how do we balance that with the need for sort of social interaction? And one of the things I think about managing projects is needing to consciously make time within your team for the social stuff, right. Even if you're still on the headphones, still sitting at home, to do a bit of that, the normal talk you'd have around the water cooler or as you strolled in from the car park.
Right. Right. No, I totally agree with that. One little tip that might be worthwhile considering is that, you know, if we were in the physical world, what we'd do is we'd go to the office kitchen. We'd make a cup of coffee or something, and we'd go in and we'd walk into the meeting room, and people would arrive sequentially. They didn't all arrive, you know, within 12 seconds of each other at the sweep of the top of the hour. So maybe just consider opening your virtual meeting 10 minutes early. Okay, and just hang out together and talk about stuff, and then people will come in when they're ready. Yeah, and then you can get your meeting underway and start to add that little extra 10 minutes. Doesn't matter who starts the meeting; somebody can start the meeting and get it underway. Okay, very good. Charlotte, next question, please.
Thanks, Nick. We've got a question based on change management next, and it's from Rohit in Mumbai, India.
Okay.
Is change management only targeted towards IT, or does it cover a broad range of industries and functions? Okay,
fantastic. And I can absolutely, you know, attest to this, because my very early days, about 100 years ago in the 1870s, when I was a change management consultant, I worked for a very large IT company, and everybody thought it was about code and managing code and that kind of stuff. Ian, go ahead.
Well, it's applicable, it's universally applicable. I mean, at the end of the day, whatever your organisation, whatever your industry, you are doing change, whether it's IT, whether it's digital transformation, whether it's processes, whether it's anything, it's all change. And what I find, a lot of organisations maybe don't badge it as a project, or maybe don't badge it as a change, it's just something that they get on, but it's still a change. And wherever there's change, you're going to need that element of change management to help the organisation adapt to it, because ultimately that's what it's about, isn't it? You know, you're changing the change by definition. You're taking the organisation and the people to a new modus operandi, a new way of working, and whatever that is, it's going to require that change management. It's absolutely not the domain or the exclusive domain of IT.
No, you're spot on there, and I think in the past, you know, people have been confused between kind of release management around different versions of software and that kind of thing, and actually organizational change management and helping people adopt, you know, different ways of thinking, different ways of acting, different ways of behaving, really, in doing their roles. And you know, those big changes have been, I think, more recently overtaken by a series of incremental, you know, significant changes for people. Perhaps the largest impact, most impactful one worldwide, really was driven by the pandemic. Somebody said last year that probably the pandemic has had, you know, more to do with being the catalyst for digital transformation than all of the CIOs around the world kind of put together. So, you know, there might be something in that. Yeah, go ahead, Mark.
Yeah, I would like to suggest to even take IT a little bit out of the equation, since the focus might be too much on the solution and the technology, where change introduces that organizational aspect, the people aspect, so it can nicely offset that narrow focus and also bring other components into play that are crucially important for the success of a project.
Yeah, I totally agree with that. Very good. Thank you very much. So, Charlotte, let's move on. Next question, please.
A question from Deepa at Delhi, India. What are the various stages of project management?
Okay, so this is more a kind of, you know, structural question for those guys and girls on the panel who are thinking about, you know, methods and so on. So what are the various stages of project management. Now, there's been a lot of words written about projects and programs around the world. So what you're about to hear most likely is going to reflect how well read, our panelists are, and also through experience that they're probably used to kind of thinking about adapting a particular method to a particular set of circumstances. So who would like to kind of kick us off with some thoughts? Go ahead, Guy.
Yeah, it's an interesting question, because I think it doesn't matter what you call the stages. The key thing about this question, or the key thing about the answer to this question, is that you break a project up into stages. And the shorter those stages are, possibly the better in some situations. And again, whether it's waterfall or whether it's agile, in waterfall you can have very short stages. Again, whatever you refer to those stages, whatever name or label you give them. And in agile, the same thing applies. Not stages, time boxes or sprints, but the duration of those time boxes is important. The key thing is that they're broken up into short durations of effort. That's very foreseeable in terms of its planning. And the better you are at breaking those stages up, the better you can meet your end dates of each stage. And it's like a puzzle that you're building up here. The more stages you meet and hit on time, the more you're going to give confidence to your stakeholders that you're doing a good job.
Right. And in your experience, Guy, having worked with so many different organizations, from the tiny to the multinationals, do you feel that that's something generally that the team involved in planning projects and programs get right, or is it something that is always worthwhile reviewing and thinking and getting another pair of eyes to look at?
No, they invariably get it wrong. They create stages which are way too long. Okay. And then at the end of the stage, they don't do a proper retrospective and see why they still messed up that stage. But again, the pandemic has created some revolutions, and we're learning to learn our lessons.
Okay. I think you're right, and thank you. That's a very, very honest, kind of answer there. And if you're sitting, kind of listening to this, thinking, I really recognise that. Yeah, that's absolutely what we do or we don't do. And do kind of comment and jump over to Slido and ask you a question. Richard, something from you, and then we'll move on.
Yeah. In project management, there's always a distinction between the planning stage and actually delivery stages. So I think that's good to point that out, that there has to be some upfront planning, and in Agile they always warn you to don't do a big design up front or big planning up front, but there has to be some planning, and project management always starts with an initiation stage or a foundation stage where you do the planning. And I sometimes miss that in just doing Agile or Scrum, to have some sort of a plan or a vision. So start with a plan and a vision, and then go do the delivery in stages. But a planning stage is always wise.
Okay, and I totally agree with you. I was with one of the team from Amazon who's involved in a retail platform a couple of years ago now, and they were talking about the minimum viable product, but they inserted one more word in. They said beautiful. It has to be beautiful. So from a user experience point of view, and this was this person's discipline, it's like just championing that, just put that in there, don't make anything unnecessarily ugly. Okay, just to make it look really good. Very good. Next question, please, Charlotte.
Thanks, Nick. We've got a question from Bikram again. Managing stakeholders at project and change management level, how can we have it at one place rather than maintaining at two different places? Okay,
all right. So we're just going to leave this question up on the screen for a moment or two, because I do want to explain a little bit of what's going on here. So you might be able to see over on the right-hand side of the question, there's a little thumbs up and there's a number 5 next to it. And that just means that people are voting dynamically. So if you point your phone, if you're watching this on a screen, on a laptop or something like that, just point your phone at the QR code. That'll take you over to register, and when you get to register, then you get to join the Slido session and vote up and vote down questions, which tells us what's important to the audience. So managing stakeholders then at the project and the change management level, how can we have it in one place rather than maintaining it in two separate places? And I guess this kind of touches at the heart of what we were explaining earlier, that these two disciplines need to be interwoven. You know, it's not even like, you know, looking at the threads that make up a blanket or clothing or anything like that. It's almost like process manufacturing. You know, you pour some blue paint in a bucket, you know, which could be project management, and you pour some yellow in, you know, which could be change management, and you mix them two together. You're looking for green here. You are not looking for a kind of, you know, marble effect. Okay, you really do want one to change the other one, okay, and one to influence the other one. Now, you know, change management by itself is just going to stay yellow. Okay, project management by itself is still going to stay blue. So mix those two disciplines together would be what I would say. Okay, all right, very good, thank you. And Charlotte, let's move on.
Next question from Stefan in Berlin, Germany. With more projects being carried out in an agile way, what impact does this have on keeping budgets and timelines under control? Okay,
so projects being carried out in an agile way, what impact does this have on keeping on budgets, our budgets rather, and timelines under control? Any thoughts on that? Yeah, go ahead, Richard.
Yeah, well, what they say when working agile, it's always between in a fixed time and a fixed budget. So keeping it under control should be very easy, actually. But then the difficult part comes in because if you work in an agile way, you should be able to focus on value. So value delivery is more important than you can leave out something out of the scope and deliver more value. But you still have to be within time and budget. So value instead of plan-driven, value-driven way of managing, it's more difficult, but it will be helpful and keep your projects within budget and time.
Okay, all right, very good. Thank you very much. So we've just got time for one more question, Charlotte, if we can, and then we're going to move into looking at our focus topic.
Thanks, Nick. I've just seen an amazing question, and I wanted to ask it myself, so I'm just going to pop it on screen. Deepak from Delhi in India asks, what is the difference between a project manager and a change manager?
Okay, all right. So here we go then. This is the kind of, you know, the Batman and the Robin type question, or any double act that you would like to care to refer to. So what are the differences, or what is the difference between the project manager and the change manager? So Ian, I'm going to pick on you to kind of kick us off, and then I'll come to Mart, if I may.
I was having a good old read of that question, actually, and just kind of just trying to get my head into it. Part of me says they're one and the same thing. You interchange project with change, and it's just a terminology thing. Some organisations use the word project manager, some organisations might use the word change manager. So there's that kind of angle from me. Right. But then thinking about it in a more change management way, the project manager is very much there to do the delivery and the implementation, if you like, and then the change manager, if we're thinking about change management, would be there to help prepare the business for the oncoming change and help transition to the new ways of working. And we see that very much in a kind of a program environment when you see it, you know, kind of the role of the program manager and the business change manager. So I think there's, for me, both could apply depending on crucially how the organisation defines it.
Okay. All right. And Mart, are you kind of comfortable in that, you know, kind of slightly schizophrenic world? Can you kind of bring those two things together in the embodiment of one person?
I think if you want to be a successful project manager and you lack the change management skills, or vice versa, it's going to be difficult for you. I think focus more on what they should have in common, like, you know, strong leadership skills, as an example, strong communication skills, things of that nature. But you should be proficient in both areas, no matter your title. Yeah.
Okay, all right. Thank you very much, Shanice. Is that something that customers kind of ask about? They might have taken a qualification in one or the other, and then they're thinking, what do I do next?
Yeah, I think we get, we get change managers wanting to become project managers. We get project managers wanting to sit, change qualifications. And I think having an understanding, like we said in the previous questions, that both intertwine together, as well as being, separate roles within themselves. I think it's just defining which is the option for you and your career.
Okay, all right, thank you very much. So look, everybody, we're going to change gear now a little bit so that we can move on to our focus topic. And as I introduced earlier, we've got the pleasure of Dr. Brin Hodgskiss with us today, who realised after 20 years working in the public sector, Brin, and this is quite an admission, you say in your biography to us that you felt you were just kind of getting it wrong, and so started to rethink a little bit about, it's not really about managing process or managing people, it's about managing meaning. And I thought that was really fascinating. It's a really high value statement. So I'm going to hand over to you now to take us through this little focus topic. If you are on Slido, everybody, and you want to ask a question to Brin, put your question to Brin. It's really easy to do. You'll see another little tab in Slido. Just click on that so that you're on the focus topic and type your question into there, and then we'll come back to put those questions to Brin after this next 10 minutes. Go ahead.
Wonderful. Thank you so much for having me, Nick. And I'm sure I've already learned so much from the day already. So hopefully I can add to that. So as I said, my name's Brin. And today I want to speak particularly, what I was asked to speak about is how can we influence people better at a distance in this new virtual world? And I'll add another challenge. How can we influence people using just our voice? Because often that's all we have in this new technology. And I think if you pop to the next slide, I'm going to start in a bit of a weird place. That's a maximum security prison. It's a Pretoria Central maximum security prison. And as part of my studies, what I did was I drove around between maximum security prison to maximum security prison, interviewing guys who had committed multiple rapes or multiple murders to try uncover what motivated them to do what they did. And when you set me the challenge of influencing at a distance, I thought of an interview I had with one gentleman. He was probably in his 30s, but he had been in prison almost continually since he was 14, when he first murdered someone. And then after that first murder, he spent most of his teenagers and most of his 20s in prison. He came out of prison, and he said he was struggling to adjust to normal society. And then he decided, you know what, I'm going to do something so bad, I'm going to go into prison for the rest of my life. So he took a group of people hostage, and he did something sufficiently bad that he'd spend the rest of his natural life in prison. And this guy looked intimidating. I was laughing because the contrast with me is quite stark. He was sort of solidly built, knife scar, broken nose, and he was tattooed almost entirely blue. There's prison tattoos and prison gangs in South Africa. So he looked like a proper gangster. And we're sitting in drinking sort of bad prison coffee, with that sort of unwashed clothes and tobacco smell, which is distinctively prison. And I was going through all the normal psychological questions we ask. And I came to one question, not expecting anything in particular of it, said, do you have any bad dreams? And he said, oh yes, I get terrible bad dreams. I said, really? I didn't expect he would be anyone who dreamt any bad dreams about anything ever. And he said, yes. I said, oh, tell me more. He said, well, I imagine I get picked up by a giant eagle and carried out to sea. And then just as we're over the sea, I get dropped. And then as I'm falling, a shark leaps up and grabs me. And that makes me feel awful. And I said, how bad? And he said, well, I feel exactly the same feelings I felt when my dad did those things to me. And as soon as he said that, he burst into tears and rushed out the room. And it was such a weird moment of transformation, because in that moment, in that admission, he went from being this hardcore badass who needs to be locked up,
Right.
to just a hurt, injured human being. And suddenly I felt, rather than sort of a little bit intimidated or distanced, I kind of felt almost an obligation to care for and protect him. And I think that's a something we all can identify with, those big emotions of being hurt, of weeping, same as we can relate to joy and disgust. If you go on to the next slide, that which is most personal is most universal. It's Carl Rogers. I left the S off his name. I had exactly 8 words in my presentation and I misspelt one of them. So, but he's so all our personal experiences are the things that most bind us to each other. So how does this actually work with influencing? So if we go on to the next slide, you know, one of the most common things, and if you've done your APMG change management course, it actually gets picked up there. One of the most common things we find in research into influencing is we like people like us. You know, there's a wonderful experiment that Robert Cialdini did with letters in New York. So he wrote letters in 3 different languages in New York, in Chinese, in English, and in Italian.
Okay.
And he dropped those letters in different neighborhoods speaking those different languages, and he dropped them near post boxes. And what he found is, if it was a letter written in the language of that neighborhood, it was more likely to be picked up off the pavement and popped in the post box. So we immediately, unconsciously respond to people who are more like us. Does this map over into business? Well, according to a 2002 Harvard Business Review study, they surveyed 1,600 executives across a range of industries to ask how they made decisions. And the largest percentage, that's 36%. And I know we like to all think, or executives like to think of ourselves as, you know, bold, I'll forge my own path. The largest group that's 36%, will only get on board once others like them have done it and they've had proof it succeeded before. So we will always look to similar others, to people like us, to help guide our decisions. And then if we go on to the final slide, I suppose the question now would be, how can stories do this particularly well? Now, stories are very good at evoking emotion. Now, when we make decisions, you know, the emotional centers of our brain light up first. Our amygdala, for example, the same brain structure that we use to respond to external threats, we use when we make decisions. And that emotional element is what stories do extremely well. And I love this this experiment they did in Princeton University, where they got someone to tell a story about their first year at high school, something we can all relate to. And what they did is they monitored the brains of the people who were listening. I don't quite know how they monitored the brains, but I have quite a mental image of someone with lots of wires on. And they then spoke, that person then spoke through all that experience, spoke through the emotion, the nerves, the excitement. And what they found was that the people listening were experiencing the same emotions. Even better, the people listening started to anticipate what emotion would come next.
Right.
So it's this neural coupling where you can get the listener's brain to reflect yours and actually run ahead of you to your conclusion. That is some of the real power you can get out of using storytelling. So, and actually I'll go on to my final slide because I can see we're just coming up to time. So, I mean, there are, of course, other ways in which you can use stories to influence. If you want to find out more, shameless plug, there are workshops I'm running which you can follow. But even better, I'd love to hear your questions now, and of course get the shared brains of the panel on it.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I do find the whole process of storytelling a really engaging way in which you're able to kind of bring people, you know, towards a particular conclusion. I mean, I spent quite a long time working with groups of people who were statisticians, and who generally wanted to make decisions based on kind of rational argument, if you like. But invariably, what was fascinating was getting people to adopt the decisions that they took was almost entirely emotional. Was very rarely, you know, the pure cold science side of it. It was much more the, you know, kind of like, you know, if this person thinks this is a good idea, I kind of relate to that person, and I think that's a good idea too. So so yeah, very good. So Charlotte, let's let's take a first question for Brin from the panel. If anybody on the panel's got a question directly for Brin that you'd like to ask in terms of his. I'm fascinated to know, you know, how you managed to even drive around between high security prisons in any country. But you've probably got something more relevant to ask, Brin. Any questions from the panel, first of all? Okay, so let's yeah, go ahead, Guy. Sorry. Sorry, can't hear you, Guy.
How's that? Yeah, Brin, thanks for that. Stories take much longer to tell and to share. And when you've got a lot of information to share, what do you think is the challenge in spending the time to tell the story versus putting the facts on a couple of slides and pushing them out there?
Yeah. Firstly, you don't need to tell a story that's completely. You don't need to tell a story as long as the one I told about the prisoner. You can. I've found often most effectively you use a very short elevator pitch, aim for 30 seconds long, and all that's aiming to do is hook people's interest. Because the biggest challenge I found was if I put things on a PowerPoint with some bullet points, give them all the facts. People often don't bother looking at the PowerPoint. They're checking their email or it gets lost. You're just using a story to hook that interest and engage them. And it doesn't need to be a big investment of time.
Thanks, Brin.
All right, very good. Thank you very much. So, Charlotte, can we have the first question from the focus topics, please?
So Natalia has asked a question: what personal qualities describe an influential leader, and who is your favourite role model?
Okay, so could you just say that again? So what
personal qualities describe an influential leader, and who is your favourite role model?
Okay, so what personal qualities describe an influential leader? Well, there's been some amazing leaders throughout history, haven't there? I think often it's quite interesting in the days where, you know, how did the Californians describe it 2 weeks ago? In healthier times, when I was kind of traveling at airports, you know, spend quite a bit of time, you know, round about the bookshop, you know, in the terminal, which after the coffee and the donut is probably the last thing that you're able to buy before you board an aeroplane. And there's an awful lot of books on leadership which are written by military people or ex-military people and so on. And I've always kind of had a bit of a challenge with that personally, because, you know, you kind of think about, well, if you're in the military generally, you know, there's an expectation is if there's somebody higher up the hierarchy than you are, if they say to do that, then generally you should do it. But it is quite an interesting thing. And when you translate that kind of leadership across to, you know, situations where you don't have the authority, but you do need to develop your influence, you know, that's the kind of the interesting juncture where these things kind of come together. So qualities then, Brin, go ahead.
You know, and I'm not necessarily a fan of a lot of the writers about leadership, because it often depends on command and control, right, or an enormous personality. But in terms of qualities, one of the things that I think is coming out more is exactly the leader's ability to manage meaning and make sense of often a very ambiguous situation. You know, and I'll draw one of my favorite examples of that is Nelson Mandela. And at the 2005 World Cup in South Africa, him accepting the trophy wearing a Springbok jersey.
Yeah.
You know, and I know it seems to someone who's not part of that culture, it seems a little bit whatever, but that was such a potent symbol of the sport of the oppressor was now being adopted by someone who had sort of the gravitas of a leader. And what that did to bind people together is just a wonderful example of how well they managed that meaning. And I think leaders who are able to do that, especially when things are chaotic, when there's a lot on the line for them, that is something to be admired.
Yeah, very much so, and the authenticity of that as well. And you know, as an observer, you know, outside of the South African context, you know, watching that, and I remember that very strongly because at the time that was hugely significant, you know, for him to put on that shirt, and it really brought the from my perspective anyway, it was a kind of a bringing the nation together. It was a unifying moment rather than a purely populist play. You know, there was something from the heart about it, which was absolutely lovely to see. Yes, Ian, go ahead.
Let's say, for me, kind of the qualities of a leader are the same as what you wrote, what the individuals, or very similar to kind of what the individual's kind of own value statement is. I don't think you can be like an effective leader unless you have the same kind of values as a person. You know, I don't think you can. Otherwise, for me, you're kind of putting on a bit of an act as a leader in the business, in the workplace, compared to how you are at home. And I think you just can't separate those. And to answer the question directly about the favourite role model, I often turn to sports people as well, and I'm just going to say Jurgen Klopp. You know, kind of, you know, I'm a huge Liverpool football fan, which may alienate a lot of people on the call actually, but you know, as a lifelong fan and that kind of embodiment of who he is and what he's like and his behaviour on and off the pitch with fans as well, I think is truly inspirational. And for me, kind of that, you know, kind of his own kind of value statement seems to be what he kind of puts through the team. So I'll stick with Jurgen Klopp.
Yeah, very good. There's some great examples, aren't there, from, you know, from sports. There's some great examples from history, from, you know, from politics that we could draw on. I mean, most recently, I think this, you know, this set of circumstances that we've been in with the pandemic has really brought out, you know, thrown a spotlight, if you like, on the different styles of leadership, different countries, different politicians, different people, some speaking from the kind of from the data perspective and others speaking from the emotional perspective. And quite interesting how uncomfortable we all become as human beings when we're being asked to make sense of something which is we just don't understand. We just don't understand. And the stark contrast between some leaders who stood up and just openly admitted that, you know, and others who kind of pretended for a little while that they were in control and in charge was fascinating. The last word on this question, Brin, and then Charlotte will go for another question.
You know, and actually, there's often tempting when we answer these questions to think, oh, there's someone else we should be admiring. When actually something that seemed to have come across is that importance of what Ian spoke about, that the authenticity of a leader.
Right.
So I'm thinking of someone in the UK context who you would not typically think of as like this driving, you know, game-changing leader is Chris Whitty, the Chief Medical Officer. Mm-hmm. You know, if you've ever seen him present, you know what, it's not overflowing with sort of charisma and fire, but he's so trusted and liked and believed because, you know, this is in 100% who he is, and he's 100% doing what he thinks is the right thing based on his whole career in science. So I think there's something very important about sort of channeling who you are and being open to that, and then that being the path to influence.
Yeah, I completely agree with you. Where he went from, I think he's possibly, certainly in my lifetime, I could not tell you who his predecessors were. I'm afraid they're not names that are kind of stuck in my mind. But certainly that whole team of people who began, you know, in the early days, being able to give facts and share facts with people and so on. And then starting to help people understand, you know, what the situation was a really important thing to be able to do, that authenticity. So thank you very much. So Charlotte, let's go to the next question for Brin.
So, question from Sabina in Warsaw, Poland. How do you successfully manage change in remote teams?
Okay, is this one of the focus topics?
Yeah, it's come in as a focus topic question.
Okay, all right. So let's try and weave these two threads together. So Brin, I'm going to invite you to comment on it kind of first, if you like, just from influencing people and, you know, trying to bring people together in that context, and then we'll move on, Charlotte.
You know, almost referring back to the presentation and what the speakers have said earlier, is invest time in building relationships, because it's so easy for people to feel very lonely, very isolated. It's very quick to send people documents, but the only way you can actually get a feel for what's happening is building personal relationships. So in my work in the NHS, we were working sort of with medical staff throughout the crisis. Mm-hmm. And one of the best tools that we found for finding out what was going on was, surprise, surprise, have a weekly meeting with all the clinical directors to say, how does it feel on the ground? Because we've got our data, but that's not getting the feeling of what it's like. And the fact that they've liked it means that even as we've got out of the crisis phase, they've kept that as a meeting that they've asked us to still keep going as an opportunity for them to speak. So I think successfully managing change remotely is just invest time in building those relationships and give time to that.
Right. Makes complete sense. Yeah, thank you very much. Next question, Charlotte.
Question from Sally. What do you enjoy most about influencing people within business?
Okay, so this is a good question. We'll probably might fit one more question in after this one. So panel, what would you enjoy the most about influencing people within business? Who'd like to jump into that first of all? Go ahead, Richard.
Well, most enjoying will be if people empathize with you, and you empathize with people, and you find each other, so get connected, and with your connection you're grow into a successful collaboration, that sort of stuff. Yeah, that would be most enjoying, to have the benefits on both sides.
Okay, absolutely. Thank you very much, Ian.
There's almost a, you know, that word influence could almost mean like, you know, to for a gain, if you like, for the individual or yourself. But I interpret it more as kind of helping an individual grow, and I very much look at that through the lens of almost like a mentoring thing. You know, if you're helping somebody grow within the business and mentor them so that they either improve their performance or whatever it may be, I think that's what I enjoy most through that kind of influencing, when viewing it through that lens of kind of mentoring.
Yeah, it's interesting, isn't it, how you start to see, you know, people kind of grow and develop in that way. Shanice?
I think for me personally, it would be watching people from all different backgrounds, you know, different life stories, watching them succeed and achieve their dreams in a professional way is so rewarding as a leader. And I think, you know, if you can get it right with one person, you can get it right with others as well.
Yeah, I agree with you. You see change happening at a pace and at a scale which sometimes it is hard to see the difference on the day to day. But when you actually look backwards a little bit, you can see it. You know, one of the great traditions in the early 20th century was that people who'd made a lot of money and grown a collection of of art or sculpture and these kinds of things, then philanthropically decided to donate that to the public. And so many public libraries and museums and art galleries and so on benefited hugely from that. And you see that kind of change happening in retrospect, but you don't necessarily kind of see it happening at the time. What changes somebody from being the industrialist to the philanthropist maybe happens, little by little. you kind of have to look backwards a bit and kind of see the effect of it. The people who decided to plant the forests did not necessarily benefit from the shade of the leaves. So it's all to do with timescales and this kind of thing. So very interesting. So that's just about where we are actually for today. So what I'd like to do is first of all to say thank you very much, Brin. Brilliant. Really, really nice. Really enjoyed that focus topic. Got me thinking about some of the things I need to do differently. Okay, straight away. So I'm going to write that down on my little pad and take that away with me for the next 7 days. Shanice, you can hold me to account for that. All right. So I'll try and be the change that you want to see. Okay, so we'll do some of that. If you've been watching kind of at home or at work, then thank you very much indeed. I want to thank everybody actually who has been online and put in so many excellent questions for us today. They've been very insightful, and the panel in the kind of green room before we started all of this were kind of saying, that's a great question, let's make sure that we get to that question, please. So thank you very much also to Charlotte and the Question Master role for today. That's really kind of you for doing all of that. So just bring you back onto screen now. That's really helpful. So thank you for doing that role. Very well done for navigating your way around that in the first session that we've had. Okay, all right then. So we're going to close up now, and I want to signpost really for everybody what is coming next. So Level Up is a weekly series. At the moment, we're just running once a week, which is at 1 p.m. British summertime. Next week's show is all about the theme of cyber resilience. And we were really talking about this from the perspective that said that, if you work for a large organization as an individual contributor, as a manager, even as an exec person, generally somebody else looks after the kind of cyber security, cyber resilience, information security for you. But increasingly, when we're working from home, we are the front line in that battle to keep the bad guys out and the good guys working. So join us next week at the same time, 1 p.m. British summertime, for cyber resilience. If you've enjoyed today and got value from it, then please do come and register for Level Up. We've got a whole series of events coming soon, and we're really looking forward to welcoming you to those shows. In 3 weeks' time, we'll be opening up in Asia Pacific. So if you are around and you're watching this on YouTube, the recording on YouTube, and you want to join us live, but you're in the Asia Pacific time zone, all the way out there, Southeast Asia, Australia, New Zealand, Japan, even India and beyond, then please do think about that. That show is going to be going live around about 4 p.m. Australian Eastern Standard Time. Okay, so very good. Thank you very much, everybody. Appreciate your time today. Take care, and we'll see you next week. Thanks. Bye-bye now.